And these are the panelists that are with us today. Very quickly, let me introduce them. And please save your applause until the end. That'll save some time a little bit. Let's go in no particular order. Marzia Habib Hassan, she has a master's in social work, runs Family Connections International, private psychotherapy practice in Toronto with international clientele. If you live in Toronto, you know she does workshops not just in Toronto but around the world. And just a word of advice to the audience, if you do say anything bad about her, she is also a lawyer, so she can sue you. But the good news is, once you're behind bars, she can also provide the therapy to help you take care of whatever problems you have. Rashad Molubai. Now, legacy is how you could define Rashad by. He's the third generation of a 110-year family business. More than 40 years of experience. If you've heard of the latest currency, Bitcoin, well, long before Bitcoin, there was bitumen, and that's what the family business is. It's the largest bitumen sourcing and shipping company in Africa, and its philanthropic work focuses extensively on sustainable development through multi-faith partnerships. Raza Jaffer is the CEO of Ensha. He has a portfolio of $2 billion worth of holdings, including Dubai International Trade Center. Now, I travel around the world. I've been to mosques around the world. The one common feature that unites us all is nobody knows how to park properly, and we never have enough parking space. What's interesting is that one of Raza's properties is something that can solve that, because one of his properties is in the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest robotic parking facility, something that I think we should start thinking about when we build our next masjids. Lastly and not least, you may have seen Ilyas Akbari from some of the other panels. You've heard about his company, Supermad Group, valued by Forbes at $700 million. You've heard how he wants to make Madagascar the dragon of the Indian Ocean, but here's something that none of you know or may know about him. He wakes up every morning at 4:30 a.m., says his prayers, does yoga, and meditates. Now, in case you say anything bad about him, he's not a lawyer, but he is a sensei with a black belt in karate. So he can't sue you, he can just beat you up. And once he does, it's okay, because we have a therapist on stage who can help you out a little bit. So just let's greet our panelists, please, with a round of applause. So we want to keep this sort of as formal as we can. One of the Koja House rules I would ask is that everybody try to participate as much as possible. We'll try to leave as much time open towards the end for question and answers. Role models are something that everybody needs. Hopefully it's something that everybody has. And more importantly, especially for this crowd, it's something that everybody in this crowd can be or become. So let me start off with the first question. And I don't mean this to be contentious at all, but we have a wealth of experience on this stage. If you look at this room, there is tremendous wealth, there's tremendous human capital, there's tremendous passion and tremendous energy. So why is it that this community has produced so few role models? Or is that even correct? Would you say that?
I think that's wrong. We have many role models out here. I don't know why we got selected, but there are many more, high achievers over here than we are.
Well, who are your role models?
I think my role model was my father, Mohammed. Unfortunately, I didn't spend a lot of my adult life with him. He died very early, but he taught us what was right and wrong. I started off life as a laborer in one of our factories, much against my wishes. Very difficult to work shifts, go by bus, not enter the offices.
Wow. So he made you do it the hard way.
He made us do it the hard way. But we can't thank him enough for what he did for us.
It's interesting. There have been some studies in America that show, most of you would think that young people today, their role models are celebrities or athletes or singers or musicians. The studies actually show that about 50%, more than 50% of young people have role models. When you ask them who are their role models, their answer is somebody in their family or somebody that they have access to, like a teacher or an uncle or someone of that nature. Just with a quick show of hands, how many of you would say that your role models were family members? And this is very interesting because this leads into one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Marzia. Children and youth will sort of naturally or instinctively by nature look up first to their parents for guidance. But we're in a room where people are business leaders. There's a high degree of pressure that's on them. There's a lifestyle that's involved. There's a lot of time spent at the office or work, at the factory, the marketplace, what have you. What's the specific challenge today in raising what some people call as trust fund kids? Kids who understand the value of hard work, but are born into an environment where they have an excess of what they need.
Mm-hmm. So yes, I think this is a very pertinent question because it's, in my field, it's actually the newly identified at-risk group for mental health issues. So in the past, in the social work field and in the psychotherapy field, we always saw people who were from disadvantaged backgrounds, and you could understand why they would have issues. Now what people are finding is that more and more people who have everything, quote unquote, they're not happy. So there's a significant, and anyone who has teenagers or who has seen teenagers will probably resonate with the fact that there is a very high incidence of depression and anxiety amongst our young people.
So let me ask you that, because people may not make the connection, right? If you have everything that you've needed, if you don't have to, for example, save to go to school because your parents have put money aside, you're going to the best schools, your parents have worked very hard to give you a life that they perhaps didn't have, how could somebody still be struggling through depression?
It's not that difficult to understand, actually, because if those of us who work hard know that a lot of life satisfaction actually comes from having a purpose, from working hard. And when we have children, and with all good intention, the reason why we're working so hard is to give them a good life. And what often happens is that so how many of us here are in their 40s and who are, and when I say trust fund kids, like I'm using the term very lightly in the sense that somebody who has access to wealth, who doesn't have student loans, who has a good inheritance coming. Yeah. And so we are second generation or third generation people with access to resources. And so here's the thing, you can actually develop two different types of extremes of relationship, right? One is to have a very entitled sense of who you are in the world, which is what I'm finding very much the young people today. They grow up with this sense of entitlement, the prince and princess syndrome. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go on Facebook and you will know what I'm talking about, right? So what happens is that, again, there's a very confused sense of your place in the world. Because here you have access to everything, you have no purpose, you've never really worked hard, and you have no, I remember when I was applying to university, most of my teachers wrote this on my recommendation, was that her drive to succeed is a bit difficult to understand given that she doesn't need to earn a living. Now in those days that was still fairly unusual, right? But today it's actually quite common. So that's one extreme, right? The other extreme is to completely distance yourself from your inheritance, in the sense to find your purpose the hard way. And I see very many young people doing that, right? And I think most of my life actually I pretended I wasn't rich. Okay, I know it sounds weird.
Should your parents not be given credit for that, for having brought you up in that manner?
Well, and you were brought up in this manner, right? Where you were forced to work it out.
That's fine, but even the kids of today who are spending money like there's no tomorrow, surely it reflects on the parents.
Now, yes, I know you have, what is it, 3 children, 4 children? Four children.
Yeah.
They're all scattered in different parts around the world?
Yes.
How would you raise them?
So, before starting, I want to thank you very much for Siftan and his team for this organization. It was really so interesting, and it's a big, so enormous job that you have done here. Really, thank you very much, and I'm personally very happy and to be proud to be here with you, and to be proud to be Koja first. And really, because we are a very strong community, we are an intelligent community, we are a very business-oriented community, and we have to really, and this is the role model to our children. This is, what we can show to our children. And one thing important, our unity. Our unity is important. We can have a different point of views, but we have to be really together because life is difficult. Life is a big struggle today for the children, for the next generation. And if they can see that we are really together, we have the same view, same path, I think that we can give a good example to our children. And about the raising the children today, for me it's very easy. I tell them, you have to be careful about 4 points. First, religion. We are Muslim. Don't forget your religion. Pray. Because this is the religion, God will help you in any problems you are going to face in your life. This is going to be the first point. The second is the family. Never forget your family. Help your family members. Be polite and respect your family. 3, education. Study well. Be good in life because it's difficult. Life is very difficult. This is a strong competition today in life. Chinese, Indians, we are Indians. Asians, they are so good at school. So we have to be very good at school and we have to be the best. And 4th, sport. Sport is very important in life because, this is how you can avoid drugs, alcohol. These are the 4. This is how we educate my wife and myself, our children today.
Who's your role model?
My role model is my father, my mother, even, because they were together for the education. And I can tell you frankly, our community is a role model. Today, if I'm here, because of our community. When I started business, I started almost with zero, 20,000 euro, almost zero. But the community helped me.
But hang on, so I have to interrupt because people perhaps from my generation or even younger generations would not look at this community and say that this is a well-functioning community. We have communities around the world that, yes, they're business-oriented, but we all know the problems that exist within our own communities. There isn't unity, quite frankly, within certain communities. Politics, petty politics, quite frankly, sometimes dominates the agenda. And things tend to work in cycles. The US president gets elected, every 4 years, and then once every 100 years, like we're seeing now, there's a complete idiot that sometimes makes it to office. But in our communities, things are very cyclical. They happen, and there's a little bit of momentum, the momentum stops, and something new happens. So there would be people that would say, well, hang on, how can you say that the community itself is a role model?
Can I say something?
Sure, yeah, of course, just jump in.
So I think the reality of the matter, like we all talk about unity, we have to confront the reality that we don't have a shared sense of values anymore. That's the reality that our children are growing up with.
I would just jump in. So there is one thing that unites Khojas around the world, and that is we need our chai, but we also like them in the styrofoam cups.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous, right? It's bad for the environment, but I would say there are certain things that can bring Khojas together, and there's a whole host of reasons. But let me circle it back a little bit. Who are your role models?
So for me, I'm I think Baroness Varsi mentioned, I'm also a sushi, which is, my mother originally was a Sunni and father was a Shia, and she converted to Shiaism. I'm half Khoja and half non. So I have had a chance to look outside within my family and outside. And as a role model is concerned, I look at several people as my role model in different areas. If you talk about role model on business ethics, it could be somebody else. My role model on faith and belief could be somebody else. My role model in different ways in spirituality could be somebody else. So I don't have any one single person as a role model. However, I have a great amount of respect for Habib family. When we talk about triple bottom line and social impact today, they were involved with schools and colleges and a lot of institutions and a lot of non-profit way before anybody else got involved, which was the social impact. I have a lot of respect for our community members, and I see more of them here today who are so quietly involved in so many things. I was riding to Davos with Mustafa Bhai and then Mr. Hussain Ali Bhai. You know, along with them, they were talking about they spend more than $7 million as a group on just certain areas of thing, but they do it so quietly that nobody knows about what they're doing. So my role model is Khoja community that does a lot, but they do it quietly.
So I want to ask you this too, right? Because within our own religious tradition, one is not supposed to openly boast about the good things that they do.
Right.
There's a certain ingrained sense of humility. Do it quietly. Don't go and announce to the world that you just, saved an entire village in India from flooding or something like this. So on the one hand, how do we balance that as business leaders and community leaders? How do you balance that ideal, which is to be modest about your good deeds, but at the same time, allow people to know what you're doing so that they can find role models?
I agree.
Because you need both.
I agree
What's
with
the
you.
answer? How do you balance that?
So I think that on
And
one
anybody
front,
else?
as admirable as it is today to see the humility, I also feel it sometimes crosses the boundary of inefficiency. It also crosses the boundaries of not inspiring people about what you're doing. So you will find 50 people doing the same thing because they were doing it so quietly, nobody knew about it. So if people unite and collaborate and take their egos away and work together on projects, I think we'll be far more efficient. If we see that happening, we would be able to inspire our next generation to force their alliances with their friends, cousins, family members, and extended families. I see, unfortunately, at this point, that if you ask an outsider to come and talk about us as Khoja community, they would say that this community doesn't seem to have too many children or empowered children who are included in this discussion.
Sure.
They would feel, I don't see my sisters, daughters, and that group is missing. Because this is getting together, we're all getting together to see what they will be in next 50 years and how we instill the pride and solidarity in the Khoja community so that they take pride of being a Khoja, even if they are 1/10 Khoja in him, they say, this is the Khoja in me that is keeping me humble. It's the Khoja in me that keeps me entrepreneurial. It's the Khoja in me that tells me to be peaceful rather than be aggressive. So these are the kind of things we think we have within the community.
Naza, I think I'd like to add on this, as we discussed yesterday. All of this is possible provided we get rid of all these divisions, these regional divisions amongst ourselves. We are primarily number one, Khojas. But we need to come together without being Indian, Pakistani, Kenyan, Tanzanian. We need to forget all of that. We need to forget about aligning with this federation, that federation. We need to work together.
Yeah, on those lines, when I first moved to Toronto, I was told I wasn't a real Khoja because I was from Pakistan, right?
I had the same problem becoming a member of the Khoja Jamaat in London, despite the fact that my father was probably one of the longest serving Khoja presidents of the Bombay Jamaat for 18 years. It took me 4 years to become a member of the London Jamaat. They wanted proof of who I was, where I was from, and still, I said, please make me an honorary East African. My wife is from East Africa.
I'll just jump in. So my wife is not Khoja. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to explain what it is to be a Khoja, somebody who's not Khoja. Now, she happened to be Pakistani. So the first thing that they couldn't grasp was, but how come you didn't grow up speaking Urdu? Because you look just like every other South Asian in the world, right? So it's a difficult challenge. But this goes touching on what you said, right? That if you ask somebody outside this community, who are the Khojas, they have no clue. You wanted to jump in, Marzi.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to go back to the point that was made about humility. And I think there's a fine line between humility and false humility, right? Allah tells us in the Quran that you've been blessed, announce it. Announce the favor of your Lord, right? And there's a lot to be said for actually accepting that you have a gift, because if you die with that gift, it doesn't do no one any favors, right? But if we acknowledge that we have something to give to the world, and we take ownership of it, only then can we share it. And this comes back to the point of our children. Developing a healthy relationship with your heritage, there's actually, because this is, by the way, a conversation that we need to have with our children. We cannot assume that they have a healthy relationship with their heritage. Because very often we think, we worked hard and we've given them all of this and they should be grateful or they should get it together, right? But a healthy relationship actually means to acknowledge that there's a great book, by the way, which my daughter recommends to, everyone. It's called Stop Pretending You're Not Rich. And that really resonated with me because many young people are actually pretending that they're not rich because they don't want the burden, because it is a responsibility. And I remember my dad telling me right from the beginning that it's no point denying who you are, but you can actually use it. If you have the privilege, you have access to resources, use it for good in the world. And that's how you can become comfortable with the idea that you didn't work for it. Because it is a burden, to be very honest.
Just with a show of hands in the audience, for those of you that have children, how many of you think that 10 years, 15 years from now, your children will be proud to be Khoja? How many of you think that your children will not consider it a part of their identity?
Depends on the trajectory we take from now. My kids are young.
So you're taking that trajectory yourself to instill that in your children?
If we remain fragmented, I'm not so sure, because we're living in Australia, we have access very rarely to the big group, and from what we hear and what we interact with the fragmented groups, we can't even be in the same Imam Barga together.
So I don't know if those people in the back could hear, but he was referring to the fragmentation of sort of the community and how perhaps, you can't even share the same prayer space with people that you disagree with.
There's one point I just wanted to ask. While you're asking this question, so I'd like to hear that. All the people who think their children will be proud to be Khojas, how many of them actually believe that it is because they will be married to Khojas, or are they really going to be 100% Khojas, only then they'll be proud to? Because I really don't know that I will be able to twist the arms of my children to keep on marrying Khojas, because I don't want them to become inspired by the Parsi community, which actually did not flourish eventually. So we know that our children, our next generations will go outside the community and will marry, and are we giving them anything to be proud of being Khoja or have a Khoja heritage?
And it's interesting because these issues have been discussed for actually decades. These issues have been discussed. There have been no solutions for decades, and while they've been discussed, these things have been happening, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. But I think you would have an interesting perspective.
Yeah, well, the thing is, marriage in today's day, believe it or not, we are experiencing, and I'm conscious of the fact that I'm throwing out quite depressing stuff. So.
And just for preamble, you do a lot of marriage counseling as well.
Yes, and there is a marriage crisis within our community, whether we like to admit it or not. Young people who are able, willing, and ready to get married are finding it extremely difficult to find suitable spouses. And I know for myself, I have 3 kids, young adults, and I would love it if they found suitable Khojas. But am I going to make that a prerequisite? Definitely not, because there are other things which are more important. Faith. It's difficult enough, and I know that somebody mentioned that, we tell them that don't drink, and we think that that's good enough. I'm really sorry to tell you, but it's not. And until and unless we do not confront the reality that our children are making different life choices, different value choices than we are, and we assume that they follow our same path. So on the thing of role models, what's the number one thing to build a role model? Is to develop a relationship. You cannot have a mentoring thing with anyone, and a relationship actually means 80% listening and 20% talking.
I was looking at some statistics when I was researching this panel, and I was shocked. I was shocked by the numbers. So an average mother spends about 6 hours a week in quality time with her children. An average father spends about 2.5 hours per week actually in the physical act of raising their children. Now, one would think that in the business community, where you're perhaps traveling quite often, you're on assignment, you're worried about not just raising your family, but the families of your employees, you have many more responsibilities, you're pulled in much more ways. I would imagine that those numbers are even lower.
And to raise successful daughters, their relationship with their father is non-negotiable. Like everyone in this room who has, who is successful and who has a daughter, like and I have to bring this up, okay, because it's been discussed on all the women's tables, but it's not on the agenda.
Oh, gossip, this is the good stuff.
It's not gossip, it's not gossip. It's look at the composition of this room, right? And like if we want to address the gender inequality, we need to confront that why are there such few women here?
I think, and perhaps to add to that, I noticed this too, that I have a number of friends and associates of mine who broke 10 or 20 million by the time they were 30, and none of them are here. And this is interesting.
Sorry.
Yeah, jump in.
Please. No, please go ahead. So concerning marriage, my wife is Italian, so I'm very concerned. But
so just the merger between Khoja and Italian food must be incredible.
I'd love to see how the culture tastes like.
That's what we call a spaghetti western.
But I can tell you that my children, they really feel Khoja, and they think.
But how did you do that?
I don't know. This is natural. I never done something special for that.
But I don't think it is, because so even for me, so my children are half as well.
Maybe
they don't know what to feel.
Maybe because our culture, Khoja's personality is strong. This is maybe maybe the case, but
Can I suggest something? Can I suggest that you ask them?
Of course.
That's the only way you're going to know.
I will. Now I will. But that's why marriage is not the main point. I think today our next generation should be a global citizen.
Right, and they are. And
Yeah, but the marriage, Khoja, or this is not going to be the main problem. Tomorrow they are in love with the American, Australian, Khoja, so it's not going to be the obstacle for their life.
Sure.
So today what should be our children? This is global, open, very open-minded, and to share, to give back to the community. This is going to be the point, and to give them the best, I think, because we are looking for the best for our children. And so, because we are talking about marriage, so this is how I see today. And I don't think that we can really manage or control it today, because things are going so fast. World, it's so open. Internet, Facebook. So there's no control possible right now.
an average, so one of the statistics is, and this is very important for those of you that are raising children who have smartphones, the average person spends approximately 2 hours, 116 minutes every day on social media. A young person can spend as much as 8 or 9 hours on social media. They're doing it in school. Some of you might even be doing it right now as we speak. But this is incredible. And so social media changed the rules, because in the past the issue was always access. There was no access, and they've talked about this in our communities forever. How do you find young boys and young girls to have access to each other?
Exactly.
Well, the access is there at their fingertips now.
Sometimes we can hear some parents, "Suta se mar chokran wo." West girl nepalese jase. But this is not a problem.
Can I add something out here? If you were to install the values that we're all talking about in our children, then it doesn't matter who they marry. I'm sure they will continue with what they've been taught and what they've been brought up in.
Sure.
So whether they marry whoever,
I know the time is short, so let me just open up the floor for questions. If you have any anecdotes or stories that you want to share about your own personal role models, that's fine, but keep it very brief. And if you do have questions, please address the question to somebody specific to make it a bit easier. At the back, please, first.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for this excellent conversation. My name is Farooq Bandali. I'm from New Jersey. Besides being in healthcare, I also work in the space of Islamic education for children. So there's an identity crisis that we are faced with in the West, and that is because we are only 250,000 around the world. At home and across the communities, we're talking about the identity. So the way we are teaching children is think about Allah, think about the Prophet, think about the 12th Imam, and think about being Shia. When you go beyond that, you are diluting this further, and we're always struggling with unity. Our purpose in life is from a spiritual standpoint. So view yourself as Shia. So there is a large body that the identity crisis from a Khojaism doesn't exist because we're pushing our children to believe that we are Shia and that we are ultimately responsible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to that end, when you talk about social media, there are children right now, 10, 11, 12, that are getting the phones. And as a result, they are getting into huge negativity, such as sexting and drugs and alcohol and so on and so forth. And so we're in a spectrum. And so my question, to Sister Marcia and Brother Yas as well, is we're finding this balance, and there's a challenge in the West. And I imagine the challenge is also in Africa and other parts. How do we square this difficulty?
It's a very good question.
No, sorry, so let me see if I understand you correctly. Are you saying the identity of the Khoja added to everything else?
At home, I tell my children our first identity is the fact that we are Shia because we are responsible to the 12th Imam. We happen to have an ethnicity, the fact that we are Khoja. But that should not define us. What should define us is Shiism.
Right. So again, I think what you're hinting towards is inclusion, first of all, number one. And secondly, when you chunk down to the details, it's very difficult to get unity, right? But and again, look at how the Quran teaches us that when you are discussing differences with someone, go back to what you agree on. So we can all agree on Tawheed, we can all agree on the basis of Shia faith. Beyond that, I think, yes, we are all different, and the more inclusive we are, and the more accepting we are of different ways of doing things, the longer we have longevity, because the more set we get and rigid, we've lost our kids, I believe.
You wanted to jump in?
Just to summarize something, I think we're all people gathered here have done extremely well in life. Some have made it from very humble beginnings, some have inherited and taken it further. But we mustn't forget to install this in our children, that we are today where we are thanks to God. And it is God's grace that we are where we are today. And we could be running in the same spot, not move forward, if not been for the grace of God. Mm-hmm. So that is something we must install in our children, the values, that this is not something that has come in from a money plant. We're very fortunate. Well, all of us without exception over here.
One of the reasons I was eager to facilitate this when I was asked to is because these are issues that turn into discussions that are long-lasting. This hasn't been a debate. It hasn't been people sort of at odds with trying to prove one point or the other. And it's a discussion that will hopefully continue at your tables over lunchtime and continue even when you go home, quite frankly. Now, I know time is very short. I did see if there is one last question, but let's keep it very brief, please.
One more statement more. I'm an extremely, extremely wealthy man. My friends are my wealth. You are my wealth.
As a solution to several problems that we talked about, Marza quite rightly said, and I also believe it's probably our number one problem, probably beyond relief of poverty or housing, and that is finding suitable partners, children finding suitable partners, one problem. Second problem, the whole generation, now we're talking about 4 generations of family, to be able to sit for dinner at least once a week together around the table, this is another problem. So towards that solution as well. And having and living in a culture of God consciousness, I'll be happy for my child and my grandchildren to marry any color person from any faith. I leave it to him to decide whether they want to become Muslims within the jurisprudential rules. But God consciousness is important. To cover all that, we have embarked on a project called the Salam Center in United Kingdom in London. Please study the website. Exactly to cover that. To have 4 generations people to be able to go to a center at one time for 2 hours, where the great-grandfather can do something, the grandmother can do something, the father and the mother can do something, the children and the grandchildren can do something, all at the same time, at least have a meal together as well. To have a controlled environment where men and women can meet in the God-conscious milieu and have people of all faiths welcomed in our center. When I say our, our control center, but open to all. Please visit the website, and the model is there. Existing, help me complete that model. I need the money to complete that model.
So you know, normally when there's a presentation or a panel, you save the best for the very end. When you're delivering a joke, you build up to it, and the punchline comes right at the end. You hit the audience with something so big that they will remember it when they go home. Unfortunately, I don't have anything profound to say. But many of our panelists did, so please join me in thanking them with a round of applause for their time.